Hello, everyone, and welcome to part two of our two-part series on doing business in Australia. My name is Flora Livesey, and I'll be your host today. On behalf of EDC and our guest today, I want to thank you for taking time to attend this virtual event. We hope you were able to attend part one of this series, where we had great guest speakers from the Trade Commissioner Service, EDC, and the Canadian Australian Chamber of Commerce, who presented an overview of Australia as an export destination. We then heard from three Canadian companies who are successful in the market, and they shared their stories regarding how they chose Australia as a market, how they entered the market, and lessons learned. If you did not attend, I hope you've had a chance to listen to the recording, which was emailed out to all registrants. So just a couple of housekeeping items before I welcome our guests. We have muted everyone, but please feel free to ask questions through the chat function at any time by addressing your questions to the EDC moderator. We will then leave all the questions to the end of the presentation, and I'll read them out and direct them to the relevant guest. Vous êtes invité à poser des questions en français et nous y répondrons en anglais. Also, we are recording the event, and all registrants will be able to access the link to the recording through their MyEDC account soon after we have finished. So today it's my pleasure to welcome three guests from the Downer Group, one of EDC's clients in Australia. Our guests will present their company overview, their focus on sustainability, and their procurement process. So once they've presented, we will have a Q&A session, allowing lots of time to answer all your questions. Our first speaker is Paul McFarlane, who joined Downer in 2016 as Assistant Treasurer and was promoted to Group Treasurer in 2018. Paul has over 25 years experience in corporate treasury, having held senior roles in various ASX-listed organizations such as Westfield, Lendlease, and Virgin Australia. Paul holds a Bachelor of Economics from Macquarie University with majors in accounting and finance. Our second speaker is Ricky Bridge, who joined Downer in 2009 and in 2015 was appointed Group General Manager of Environment and Sustainability. Ricky has over 20 years experience in environment and sustainability, both in the government and private sectors. Ricky holds a degree in environmental science and a master's in science and technology and specializes in environmental management and corporate sustainability. And our third guest is Derek Yen, who joined Downer in 2011 to lead Downer's 5-year transformation program. At the conclusion of the program in 2016, Derek took over Downer's procurement and property portfolios and currently holds the position of Group Head of Procurement, Property and Security. Prior to joining Downer, Derek had a 12-year career at Qantas Airways Limited, during which he held a number of executive, commercial, operational, and transformational roles in the areas of airports, catering, Qantas Holidays, JetSet, Travel World, and Qantas Business Travel. Derek is a chartered accountant and chartered professional accountant and holds a Bachelor of Economics from the University of Western Ontario in Canada. He worked at KPMG for 5 years before joining Qantas. So Paul, over to you.
Thank you, Flora, and good afternoon, everyone. I trust you're well and 2021 is treating you better than 2020. Look, I just wanted to start by saying that we're very grateful for the opportunity to talk to you about Downer today, and hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll understand a little bit more about what we do here at Downer. I think it's fair to say that Downer is really a quiet partner in a lot of what happens in Australia, both individually and for corporations across both Australia and New Zealand, I should say. So we're a very diverse company in some respects, but if you distill it all down, we're essentially focused on providing urban services, and that is transport, utilities, facilities, and asset services in both Australia and New Zealand, the primary areas in which we operate. These urban services essentially range from laying and maintaining roads, designing, manufacturing, and maintaining passenger and light rail with our partners, to wind farms, telecommunications lines, gas and oil infrastructure, and water treatment facilities. So the full span of social and urban infrastructure here in Australia. So in the pack today, we've included a relatively brief overview of the group and the areas in which we operate. And I'm just going to start by providing you a little bit of history around Downer on slide 5. I think it is, it's actually 8. 9, sorry, apologies. Order has changed it. So Downer has a long history in Australia and New Zealand, having started over 150 years ago. We employ just over 50,000 people, so one of the largest private employers in both Australia and New Zealand, listed on both the Australian and New Zealand Stock Exchange. And we have small operations, but meaningful operations, I should say, outside of Australia and New Zealand, across the South Pacific and to a certain extent in South America and Africa. And I'll touch more on that as we walk through the presentation. The next slide is, I guess, our purpose, promise, and pillars. And I think it's worthy just to spend a little bit of time on this, because these pillars, I guess, underpin everything that we do here at Downer. So our operations, the way we operate, both internally with each other and also with our customers and suppliers, are dependent on the safety, delivery, and relationships, as well as thought leadership. So they're a critical way that we operate, and I think it's worthwhile keeping that in mind as well as we talk through today's pack. I'm just going to then go through some high-level overview of the business itself on the following slides. If we just tick to the next one, please. So Downer has changed considerably even in the short time that I've been at Downer, in some 5 years. So traditionally, we were heavily focused on mining, engineering, and construction. But with the acquisition of Spotless, a facilities management group, in 2017, we started to shift that focus more to urban services. And so more recently, over the last probably 12 to 18 months, we've been successful in de-risking our exposure to construction businesses. We have wound down our exposure to solar businesses. It's been a bit of a challenging sector in many respects here in Australia. And at the same time, we've increased our exposure to those core areas of passenger rail and urban infrastructure. So more recently, I don't know if you would have seen, but there's been a number of divestments made across the group, and that's principally in the mining and laundries areas. So those businesses, whilst they've traditionally been good earning work streams for the group, they also carry with them a higher level of risk and a significant amount of capex for growth each year. So Downer's aim to be a lesser capex and lighter capital style of business. Those sales are critical on the next step of our urban services journey. So there's still a couple of those business lines left, but the majority of the laundries and indeed the mining business has been sold. Just turning to the next slide. So the group as it currently stands is essentially split into a core and non-core group. So the core, again, are those key areas of transport, utilities, facilities, and asset services that you see in green on slide 12. And the non-core includes not only those businesses that have been sold in mining and laundries, but also the hospitality business, which provides catering to large corporate events and sporting stadia and the like, for part of the Spotless business, but also the balance of the infrastructure and construction and what we term our EC&M business lines. So the aim is to, I guess, ultimately wind those down and focus essentially on the green core business lines. Just turning to the next slide, please. So just a wrap, I guess, of the last really 6 months of Downer. So we've released our results for the half year ended 31 December 2020, just a couple of weeks ago. And it's important to note that the business has demonstrated some strong resilience in the face of COVID. There were some challenges earlier in the year, and we can talk about that a little bit more later in the pack, but they're principally around our hospitality business line, which does the catering, and obviously certain aspects of that were shut down, so that business was pretty much put on ice for a lot of the period. But the core urban services continue to deliver. We continue to build, maintain roads. We continue to operate light rail and passenger rail and perform many of those services across the group. So I guess key to that continuity has been a significant reliance on government and government-related contracts. So in excess of 80% of group earnings comes from government and government-related contracts or regulated assets. such as water and power infrastructure, the passenger rail that I've mentioned before. So that's a key differentiator for Downer when you look at the group relative to competitors in the sectors that we operate in. In terms of the achievements over the half as well, there's a little bit of a large transaction for us was achieving 100% ownership of the Spotless Group, the company that I mentioned before, that is a facilities management company that has been around for some time. We launched a takeover bid in 2017 and it got to 88% ownership. So we've been managing that business essentially as a wholly owned subsidiary, but without direct control over the entire business, with an independent board and separate debt and credit platforms. So that acquisition of the balance of 12% in July of last year is critical to bring Spotless under the fold and integrating their capabilities with Downer's own. We also, subsequent to that acquisition, completed a 1.4 billion Australian dollar sustainability-linked refinancing, which essentially merged the Downer and Spotless debt platforms under one syndicated loan facility. And that facility uniquely has a number of KPIs, key performance indicators, the achievement of which results in a reduction of the margin on the loan or increases if they aren't met. So, and Ricky Bridge will talk to those in a little bit more detail later in the pack. Again, as I mentioned, we've been successful in crystallising over $500 million of asset sales over the half, and our sustainability credentials are market leading in many respects. Just moving on to the next slide, please. And one more. But transport is one of the core of our urban services offering. The financials in here reflect the half year ended 31 December 2021. This, the key business lines within transport are road services, are rolling stock services, and transport projects. So we're a leading manufacturer and supplier of bitumen-based products and an innovator in the sustainable asphalt industry and circular economy. We use a lot of recycled products and environmentally sustainable methods to produce asphalt in our plants across Australia and in New Zealand. This includes there's a product called Reconifalt that we use that contains a high amount of recycled content derived from waste streams that would otherwise be bound from landfill. And we also invested in a modest JV it is, but still meaningful JV 2 years ago called Repurpose It, which redirects commercial, industrial and household waste into landscaping products, building products and road base and the like. So those are very much core focuses of the road business as well as its traditional business lines. Rolling stock, we've got some very long-term passenger rail contracts, both in Australia, both in New South Wales, I should say, and in Melbourne. So it's a 35 plus year contracts for the design, manufacture with our partners and delivery, and then ongoing maintenance of passenger rail across those networks. The first of those Sydney Growth trains is essentially complete and operation, and the other is a high-capacity metro train network in Melbourne, which the first 3 cars of which have been delivered this year. There's a number still to flow through. We're also instrumental in Newcastle Light Rail and other light rail projects around Australia and in New Zealand as well. Our transport projects, part of the transport business, has multidiscipline solutions across road, rail and power systems. We work with in alliance style contracts with the likes of Auckland City Rail Link, which is a new project over there. As I mentioned before, light rail in Parramatta and Warrnambool in Victoria. These capabilities include intelligent transport solutions, road network management and maintenance, facilities maintenance, utility services and renewable technologies. So the design and construction of light rail, signalling, track and station works and the like, all captured under the transport business line. Just move to the next slide, please. Our work in hand is essentially the secured contracts that remain, or that the transport business has in place. So there's 16.9 billion Australian dollars of work in hand across, again, primarily government contracts. Just talk to the next slide then, please. And one. So utilities business is another core part of our urban services offering. That business is principally focused around power and gas, water, and telecommunications. So in the power and gas area, so we design and construct steel lattice transmission towers, substations, electricity and gas networks, asset inspection and monitoring services, and connect tens of thousands of new power and gas customers each year. We also provide meter, energy, and water efficiency services for government, utilities, and corporations throughout Australia. On the water side, our expertise includes water treatment, wastewater treatment, water and wastewater network construction and rehabilitation, desal, and biosolids treatment. Our telco business line focused on communications, both fixed and wireless, networks for communications carriers, and private and government enterprise. So we've been a key provider of the 5G rollout and mobile black spot services to Telstra. We're instrumental in the National Broadband Network, or NBN, construction rolling off, which is now transitioning to NBN maintenance. We're the leading provider of services in New Zealand for all the top tier companies there, with a focus on their own national rollout of 5G. Let's turn to the next slide, please. Utilities business also has a significant amount of work in hand, 5.2 billion. There is still a very high degree of government-related contracts in that work in hand, some 74%, as you can see on the slide. But some large sort of relationship-driven contracts with Sydney Water, AusNet, and some large regional councils there as well. The next slide, please. +1. Facilities is essentially the spotless business that I referred to earlier. That business is focused in the areas of defence, health, education, government, and non-residential building. So on the defence side, we have a number of businesses operating in that area that have long-standing relationships with the Australian and New Zealand Defence Force. We provide defence estate maintenance and operations in New South Wales, operations command and the like, and a broad range of professional management services, including asset sustainment, asset upkeep services, and the like in that sector. Health, education, and government is an area or a business line that's focused on services for the federal, state, and municipal government departments. So we provide services for large regional hospitals like Bendigo and New Royal Adelaide Hospital. So that encompasses everything from cleaning and facilities maintenance to catering in some instances and the like. So the full suite of facilities maintenance there, excluding the medical side, so the doctors and nurses essentially. The non-residential building is an area that's just essentially focused on, in New Zealand, I should say, through the Hawkins business, which was applied some 2 or 3 years ago. So, that's also really focused on that infrastructure build, principally around Auckland at the moment, where there's some pretty heavy activity in the construction space. So there's a lot of work going on there. That's a core business in New Zealand, and it's a long-standing business in New Zealand. Just turning to the next slide, please. So facilities work in hand, some 12.6 billion, and again, a very high proportion of government-related contracts. I guess what's unique about facilities business as well is the long-term nature of those contracts. So these maintenance contracts, average life is in excess of 15 years in many instances. So there's a long-term relationship contracts that we have to provide the services at the hospitals that I mentioned before, defence and the like. So very much a relationship-driven contracts. Just turning to the next slide. So asset services is a relatively new business line for the group, but this business is essentially providing maintenance, turnaround, shutdown, and capital programs for power generation and industrial operations throughout Australia. So there's a key focus on oil and gas, and you can see there we're in the business of helping our clients optimise the reliability, efficiency, and costs of their assets throughout the entire life cycle. Also a focus on power generation and industrial services. The contracts, and then if we just turn to the next slide, contracts in that area are primarily in the private sector just by their very nature, so the likes of Chevron and Santos, and relatively short dated, so given again the nature of those that business. Okay, look, I think that's all from me for now. I'll just hand it over to Ricky Bridge to talk about sustainability at Downer. Thank you.
Thanks, Paul. And hello, everyone. Just touching on some of the points that Paul mentioned in earlier slides. I guess the sustainability, I'm going to give you an overview of sustainability at Downer. I'm going to touch on the sustainability link line. Some other features of Downer's sustainability, some of our highlights, and then I guess show you how that sort of all integrates into Downer's overall strategy. So next slide, please. So as Paul mentioned, Downer's shift and our movement towards our our urban services business. So therefore, we have seen shifting our investment focus away from mining and laundries. What this is, it also supports our decarbonisation pathway. So one of our sort of our material issues is climate change, and how we, like other organisations, decarbonise is high on our agenda. So integrating that with that urban service strategy is a good fit for Downer. And as you can see there, it's setting Downer with its urban services business to thrive in a low carbon economy. With the divestment of mining and laundries, we are set to achieve a 35% reduction in our scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions. And that will also help feed into, as Paul mentioned, the $1.4 billion syndicated sustainability linked loan. And I'll talk about some of the KPIs that underpin that loan in some slides. In terms of our sustainability credentials, we are the ESG rating agencies. We are leading in a lot of those agencies. One in particular that we just recently got scored in was S&P Global. Some of you may know it as the Dow Jones Sustainability Index. And they listed Downer for the first time in their sustainability yearbook for 2021, and that is basically because we were ranked in the top 15% of our industry sector. And we also got awarded the industry mover status. And to be awarded that, you have to, that was solely awarded to us in our industry sector. And that was because of our year-on-year performance over the last couple of years. So I'll sort of talk to you a little bit about the journey and what Downer's done and how we've gotten to this position we're in now, and where we want to continue this and continue our sustainability journey. On top of that, we've also a couple of years ago, on the back of our implementing the recommendations of the task force on the TCFD, so the task force for climate-related financial disclosures, the organisation released its a science-based aligned target, and as part of that, we have made a commitment and pledged that we will reduce our scope 1 and 2 greenhouse emissions by 45% to 50%. By 2035 and be net zero by 2050. So again, that's another driver that's sort of underpinning the strategy movement towards urban services, and therefore what we do within our organisation. And we're not just focused on what we're within our organisation. We also recognise the role that we play in our customers' journey. So a lot of what we do and what we're looking for in that clean tech space is looking for looking for suppliers and partners to partner with in order to help our customers decarbonise and bring those smarts to the table and develop those relationships and partnerships. We also have, sustainability isn't just all about climate change. So for Downer, it is the broader piece. So we do look at the social aspect, the social elements of sustainability. And as Paul mentioned, we're an organisation with over 52,000 employees. So, and the services that we provide are very much in the social infrastructure space. So we recognise that it's what we do in Downer that can impact the lives of people every day. Now, as part of that, with our employees, we're a people business, so our employees are extremely important to us. So we have an employee engagement survey, and we received a 4% increase score in 2020, and hoping to increase that in future years. Our workplace safety, we are industry leaders in our safety culture, and we have a big focus on our mental health and well-being. And again, as part of the materiality assessments that we do to inform strategy, as well as our sustainability report and disclosures, health, and well-being, health, safety, and well-being is our #1 material issue in the organisation. And also, in recent news, just on the 10th of February, the organisation released its first modern slavery statement, which is a really great milestone for Downer. Next slide, please. So I won't spend too much on this slide. I think I've pretty much covered most of it, but it's just to, I guess, we've given the broad definition of sustainability at Downer means sustainable and profitable growth, providing value to our customers, delivering our services in a safe and environmentally responsible manner, helping our people to be better, and advancing the communities in which we operate. So that is what sustainability is for Downer. And then, I've given a little bit more there around, as I discussed, around our ESG strategy. It is often you'll see organisations have an ESG or a sustainability strategy that's somewhat standalone. In Downer, it is completely integrated. So we don't have a standalone sustainability strategy; it's integrated into our business strategy. And that is very much driving that shift from high capital intensive activities to low capital intensive, and hence lower carbon activities. We have the highest level of standards, and that is a strong part of what we stand by. We talked about the zero harm, which in Downer is health, safety, well-being. It's also about performing our operations and activities in an environmentally responsible manner, and also advancing the communities in which we operate. So working with our communities is a strong part of what we do. And also to our people. So the key areas around our people strategies: promote an inclusive and diverse workforce, enhancing our cultural development programs, and continue to action our innovative reconciliation action plan. And I'll talk now about how that intertwines into the sustainability linked loan. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, before I do that, we've got I just put this slide in here. So as most of you will be aware, there's the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And so Downer's ESG or sustainability strategy, we have aligned to those goals. In 2019, we carried out a materiality assessment, and these were the top 7 sustainable development goals that our internal and external stakeholders thought that we had the most contribution to, or that we could influence the most in a global sense. So I've included those there for people just to have a look at, and we've also we're in the process of revisiting that materiality assessment this year. So we'll be able to have some comparable data, and we'll be able to see whether or not any of these sustainable development goals change for this year compared to 2019. Next slide, please. Okay, so onto the sustainability linked loan. So it was one of 4 to have been issued in Australia. It was it was one of the largest that has been issued, and was definitely the in 2020. Our sustainability linked loan is unique in that we've got 2 KPIs that are around climate change and greenhouse gas emission reductions. And we have further two KPIs that talk more on the social elements of sustainability. And I'll talk about them on the next slide. But essentially, this for us was, we'd done a lot of work in this space prior to linking these KPIs to the loan. What this does is it provides, it integrates down as sustainability performance with our financial performance. So the two go hand in hand. And off the back of us, disclosing our science-based aligned target, it was a natural fit that we align those targets to the link loan. So for us at the moment, based on a an FY20 baseline, it was a 2.96% reduction year on year, which will see us get to that 45 to 50% by 2035 and net zero by 2050. What we've also done to add some additional additionality KPI is to try and stretch the business, where there's an additional incentive if we can achieve 5% reduction in any given year, or year on year for any given year. So that works based on intensity as well. And if you look on those slides there, I've just shown what on the left hand side, the little graph down below shows our last 3 years performance on intensity. And then if you look over on the KPI 2 there, the graph there shows that on absolute scope 1 and 2 emissions. Now, as I said, those graphs don't take into consideration the divestments that have just taken place, which Paul has spoken about. And so we will see a further step change or a further step reduction in Downer's greenhouse gas emissions, which is really great and positive that we're heading in that direction. The second KPI is about, as I've been talking, it's a science-based aligned target. So what we thought we'd do in here is the banks incentivized us if we were to get that registered under the Science-Based Target Initiative and have that target formalized. So we're in the process of doing that. Now, what that means is for us to get there, we then have to look at our scope 3 emissions. So that's looking at our suppliers and working with our suppliers to help them decarbonise. So that's the next phase of the journey for Downer, which this loan has given us that impetus to do. Next slide, please. I'll just go over these a little bit because, again, I understand the audience here. There's not a hell of a lot that you could probably do in order to help us achieve these KPIs, but these are very important to Downer. So, with Australia and New Zealand, we've got our Indigenous Torres Strait Islands and Aboriginal in Australia. We've also got our Maori culture in New Zealand. So we've got training programs designed in the organisation to support and to, all that, that culture comes through in New Zealand leadership program, but also creating around our Indigenous cultural and awareness here in Australia. So they're important programs, and we are incentivised there by continuing to run those programs, but also increasing the number of people that we get that get put through the training course, and therefore can share that knowledge across other parts of the business and have a greater understanding of those cultures that are important to our countries of origin. The fourth one is mental health. As I said, this is an emerging issue. It's an issue that in the sectors that we operate, and also coming off the back of, or not off the back of, dealing still with COVID. We see this as an issue for our workforce. It's an issue for the sectors that we work in, and something again that is very important to us. So we have a leading program. It's a gold standard accredited mental health first aid training program, and putting people through that program is something that we want to continue to do. You may see there in FY21, FY22, the numbers that our targets are slightly lower. That's mainly because of the COVID restrictions that we have in order to train people. So that's affected the targets that we could set. So they've been reduced as a result of that. We were optimistic that from FY22 to FY23 that we'd start to see we'd start to see those restrictions eased and the world sort of get back to a bit more normality with vaccinations and the like. And therefore those numbers increase from that point on. Next slide, please. So this slide is really just to, I guess, to recap on, I guess, where Down has started to now in terms of our whole energy, greenhouse gas, emission reductions, sustainability, and how that's now all been, how we've got to this leading position that we're in now. So it hasn't just come about. We've been working hard at this, but it really started for us in about 2008. And 2008, around that 2008 was when we first made our first sustainability disclosures. And it was also an interesting time because back then the organisation, I think, were very much ahead of the game in that they started to link sustainability KPIs to executive short-term remuneration incentives. So that started to create a bit of a different drive within the organisation, or an internal lever to really start focusing in on some of these areas. In 2009 we had our first sustainability report, and then as you can see, there's key milestones as we've gone through to 2021, including the sustainability linked loan. And that short-term incentive, the sustainability linked to short-term incentive schemes, it still exists today. And if anything, that's become more prevalent as, I guess, the sustainability has moved further up the agenda. I think that's pretty much it for that slide. Next slide, please. Okay, so often it's all good having a pledge and having a science-based target and having that link to a sustainability-linked loan, but we as an organisation, we need to have a bit of a pathway and strategy on how we're going to get to that net zero. And obviously, in the short term, the divestment piece is a big part of that, and it's the first part of it, but it's not the only part. So a lot of people have said to us, oh, you're just relying on divesting your carbon emissions in order to meet your net zero. Well, that's a pretty unsustainable business proposition if we were to do that. So as I said, those decisions are strategic. But here, so on the first one for scope 1 and 2, we talk about, the urban services strategy, which we've already covered. We're still looking at, the next thing is constantly looking at our energy efficiency, and that comes through those internal KPIs that we incentivize the executives and the heads of the lines of business in order to look at how they can be more efficient, because if they're more energy efficient, we're reducing carbon emissions and we're also lowering our cost base. So there's a lot of space in that energy efficiency area where we're looking, we're working with partners on clean tech. And in all those lines of business that Paul went through, you can see there's just a whole host of opportunity in terms of what we can do there, not only for us but more so for our customers. We see that fuel switching and technology, that'll be a big part of our strategy. We recognise that moving on to the EVs and alternate fuel vehicles, there's a lot of work going on in this space. But right now in Australia, it's probably not at the tipping point in terms of price and feasibility. So keeping a watchful eye on that, and we've expected to see movement and price parity start to occur around 2025, but really keeping an eye on that, as well as the role that we play in building the infrastructure for the electricity network in Australia. And that's not only about building doing the transmission lines, poles, wires, substations, battery storage, the renewable generation with wind farms. So it's not helping the grid decarbonise, but recognising that the grid is decarbonising, and as a result of that will also help Downer, especially in Australia, in lowering its emissions. There, I've just got to, that's just covering off on what Downer's role is. So that's covering off on scope 1 and 2. Next slide. So now we're looking at the scope 3, and as we said there, the scope 3 for us is working. It's not only is it, I guess with COVID, our flight emissions have fallen off a cliff. So they're looking good as a result of COVID. but more so working with our suppliers. And here we look at low carbon materials. So this is in that transport projects business, in our road service business, and to some degree utilities. Looking for low carbon materials is a big piece to that. So there's a lot of work going on that we don't play in, but we obviously are a buyer of concrete for the work that we do. So there's a lot of work going into concrete manufacturers looking at how they can reduce their low emissions. Concrete typically has been a high emission material. And likewise for Downer. So we keep an eye on the asphalt, and Paul was talking about some of those asphalt products like Reconifelt and the like. So seeing how we can decarbonise those products, as well as dealing with waste issues that we have in Australia. So I'm not sure if you know, but a lot of Australia's waste used to be packaged up and just shipped off to China, and now China is no longer accepting that waste. So Australia is now having to deal with it internally itself. So looking for end use products for those materials is a really emerging area, and something keeping a close eye on with Economy and our Repurpose It business. Customer and supplier commitments around energy and emissions. We have an infrastructure sustainability rating tool. Most of our large infrastructure projects, and especially those with the government, commercially and contractually come with an ISCA rating now. So there's a whole range of things that we have to do in those contracts now to meet, to get a rating and to get a score. And these scores are high, they're hard to achieve, and they are all evidence-based. So they get externally verified. It's a fairly rigorous process. So that drives a lot of innovation. It also drives a lot of sustainability outcomes that we then can share across other projects and across the industry as a whole. We've sort of talked about the EVs within our own fleet, but it's also working with our customers and the EVs and alternate fuel vehicles in their own fleet. And for example, there, when we talk about rolling stock, so looking at, what's the next phase of rolling stock? I guess if they're all electrified, so moving from diesel to electrified rolling stock, and then having the grid decarbonise with more renewables coming online, we'll see that decarbonise. And again, a customer and supply grid emissions. So there's just a couple of, I guess that's our strategy, the focus areas, and that's what we're looking at across our Scope 1 and our Scope 3 emissions. But I think the key message here is that we recognise that we have a huge role to play in helping our customers decarbonise as much as we do ensuring that we decarbonise ourselves. Next slide. All right, I'll hand over to Derek again.
Thanks a lot, Ricky. Good afternoon and good evening to everyone in Canada. If we go to the next slide, I'll walk you through very quickly procurement at Downer. Last year, across the various business lines that Paul walked you through, Downer spent more than $8 billion across more than 30,000 suppliers and subcontractors. We at Downer, like any other big business, work to aggregate our spend where beneficial. But due to the extensive nature, diversity, and location of our offerings, that, as you would have seen from all the stuff that Paul walked you through, the various services that we provide, we need not only big, but also medium and small suppliers. So how do we select which one we go for, or which company or type? At Downer, what we try to aim to do is make the easiest thing to do the right thing. Or sorry, we want to make the right thing to do the easiest thing to do, whilst driving the optimal cost and performance outcomes for Downer. We break this out into 4 objectives on the procurement side that you can see in the pentagons up on your screen. The first one is ensure value for money is delivered. Second one, ensure governance and probity requirements are met. Third, streamline procurement processes. And fourth, deliver upon social and sustainable procurement goals. Now, working back, Ricky just walked you through number 4, and basically that's how that fits. 2 and 3 likely make sense to you based on your own individual companies, but 4 probably, sorry, number one probably makes sense as well, but I'll drill into that because often I get asked, in your mind, does value for money just simply equal price? Or where does price come into play for value for money? So price for us is a subset of value for money. We see value for money as not the lowest price nor the highest quality good or service. Value for money is derived from a fair and balanced assessment of a range of financial and non-financial factors. These include, but wouldn't be limited to, the quality of the good and service, the fitness of the proposal that comes through, the supplier's experience and performance history, both within Danner and outside of Danner. The flexibility of the proposal, and generally that's where we look for innovation and adaptability for flex up, flex down. And then lastly, environmental sustainability, which also has an overlap to 4. So moving to the next slide, how do the objectives come into play into our processes? So I'll start with the value chain that you see up above. That's what we call within Danner our procurement value chain. So going left to right, we follow 4 simple steps. 1, there's a demand for widgets for a certain scope, spec, and volume. 2, we move into source. We figure out who should we source those widgets from and under what conditions. 3, once we have that in place, the contractor, the pre-qualification, we can then pull down on deals from and obtain the widgets or businesses and various business lines that you saw. And then 4th, we manage the widget supplier for continuous improvement. Now, applying our value chain to the high-level process boxes that you see below, basically the key bits appear in pre-bid, the first gray box on the left, and then post-award, project post-award. Now, the 2 key touch points for suppliers or subcontractors to Danner are boxes 3, where there's tendering and quotes in pre-bid, as well as boxes 8, where it's post-bid, where we're actually in delivery or we're moving into delivery for the project. Now, the key points there are really getting in the box prior to 3 and 8, so 2 and 7, where basically our procurement planning is done. So in the procurement planning phase, here in Danner, what we do is we've recently equipped our businesses with what we call a sourcing tool. So if you picture in your mind's eye TripAdvisor, Expedia, or just about any travel website, what we do is we've set up something very similar. So our people can enter in basically what they want to buy, widget, where they want to buy it, New South Wales regional, and how much they plan to spend. Now from that, the tool outputs options and info on the various suppliers that we have available, either that have been within Danner before, our historical spend, or ones that have responded to various EOIs or RFIs that basically we've captured and put in the tool. In addition to the supplier name, category, and the like, it'll highlight preferred suppliers / contractors for our people, highlight key factors such as Indigenous ownership, whether they have any specialized social and sustainable procurement metrics, whether they've been already pre-qualified in Danner, whether they're already set up in our ERP or not, whether they, how they rate for modern slavery, as well as historical spend and previous performance evaluations within Danner as to how they're rated. Now, based on this and other factors, our people then build that procurement plan that I mentioned, and they also weigh it up against, well, do we have the internal capability or not? And that then determines what we go to market for or what we don't go to market for, and to who. Now, if you're interested, I guess the key ways to be involved, and none of these are mutually exclusive. So you have one or many, and I suggest more rather than less. The first way is look out for EOIs or RFIs that Daniel puts in market. Next bit is if you have specific areas that you want to target, work with Terry and Flora and the others, and we'll help you identify key stakeholders in those areas, and we'll work to build relationships with you on those. The last one is over the next month or so, I'll have Terry or Flora or one of their offsiders forward you a link where you can complete your contact details so that you, as well as what categories you play in and where of your offering, and you can put in your relevant details so that you can be included in that sourcing tool that I mentioned. Now, to manage expectations for you, you will fill out your details, but obviously you won't have any historical spend. You won't have any performance evaluation. So again, if you put in your mind's eye TripAdvisor or Expedia, you've entered it in, you're looking at the various hotels that you want to choose from. You won't have any star ratings as yet, but at least you'll be there as a start. And as I said, we can tackle other methods going forward to further expand. That's all I had. Back over to you, Flora.
Great, thank you, gentlemen. So it's now time for Q&A. And so just a reminder to the audience that you can send your question via the chat box to the EDC moderator. And then I'll direct it to the relevant person, or you can tell me who the question is for. So I'll get started. So we understand that Downer is already working with Canadian companies. So just wondering if there's any comments regarding your experience working with Canadian companies, any special strengths and weaknesses, or is every company that you work with different? Who should I send that over to? Maybe Derek?
Sorry, trouble.
Or Paul?
No, yeah. My apologies. Yeah, so to your question with regards to working with Canadian companies, each company is different. Okay. However, working with Canadian companies, we generally find is easier due to a number of factors. So the first bit, coming back to one of those comments I made, as well as Ricky made, there's low modern slavery risk. And as well, generally, working with Canadian companies, it's transparent and known with regards to the additional costs for any international administration, foreign currency exchange, transport, custom duties, and the like, as well as logistics, customs, and other regulations, as well as the quality and safety standards are largely aligned, or where we can see points of difference, we can factor those in quite well. As well, there'd be a low potential for bribery and corruption compared to some other foreign jurisdictions. Generally, similar legal protections should disputes arise. And, even though my French is not the best, generally there's a lack of language barriers, or we can always get Flora to translate in between. So I guess those would be the general benefits for it.
Okay, thanks. So are there any obstacles for Canadians trying to do business in Australia? For example, the United States, there's now this Buy America policy. Is there any kind of Buy Australia policy? Any major obstacles?
Yeah.
I think Derek, you.
Okay. There are. We're seeing a general trend with regards to our clients asking for more local content. So there is that. However, there's generally what we go back to them with is that there's a trade-off of cost, delivery, quality, and product. Cost delivery and I guess other factors on that. Now that being said, other I guess inhibitors would be lack of local presence. So, if your product needs a lot of after servicing, generally that would be an inhibitor as well.
So yeah, that sort of was my next question, is having some kind of a local presence, either an agent or a distributor or some kind of feet on the ground. Is that pretty key to working with Downer?
Generally, again, it'll depend on the type of service or product that you have, but it always assists.
Okay. And then regarding adoption of, clean tech or any kind of new technology, how does Downer go about that? Are there processes for doing pilot projects, for example? Do you do demonstration projects? How would a newer technology company get on Downer's radar?
It's probably a question for me. Flora, it's more around piloting. Yeah. So building those relationships, partnering, piloting. And, if we look at what the roads business has been able to achieve with their low carbon apps that they've all started, partnering with, research institutions, an organisation in Australia called Close the Loop, and partnering with them with their smarts, and doing it on a small trial. Just starting small, and then just growing the confidence and the trust in the market and our other customers, and then expanding that product line out further. So. There are a lot of trials that go on across Downer on lots of things. But generally it's proof of trial, and then look to expand.
Okay, because there was a specific question from a company saying they're a clean tech company focused on emissions, especially methane. So the best process would be to probably start somehow with a pilot.
Yeah.
For methane reduction. Okay. And you're providing a lot of services to clients across Australia as well as New Zealand and other geographies. And are you finding that your clients are really keen to adopt sustainable solutions? Any experience in other geographies that are maybe more ready to adopt? How do you think Australians are in terms of being really ready to embrace clean tech?
Yeah, I think generally speaking, very interested in clean tech. As I said, the whole climate change, decarbonisation, the Paris Agreement is really driving that. We're even seeing here in Australia, like a company called Fortescue Metals, and they're going made a very strong focus around wanting to mine ore for steel, and doing that at net zero. So they've invested heavily into renewable energy. They've invested heavily into hydrogen tech, but clean, green hydrogen technology, and they're going hard at that, as well as the haul vehicles use on the mine site. So they're going for a complete net zero of that mine, which is pretty big when you think of mining in Australia and where it was probably a couple of years ago to where that's taking it now. We still see, if you look back, Paul mentioned, we're largely, our customer base is largely governments. So there is still restrictions there, or not restrictions, but barriers in terms, or challenges around government specifications, creating change with government, working with the governments to change those specifications, to bring in the innovation, and to bring in some technologies that may not be completely proven. There's also if we look in, there's a lot of pressure on the likes of Chevron and those larger scale, in the oil and gas, as well as the power generation to do with carbon capture storage. So there's a lot of pressure to be putting on them. There's a particular site on Chevron's over in Barrow Island, which has got a lot of media attention around its carbon capture storage system that it's implemented. It all seems to be sort of going well right now, but so look, I think what it is about making sure that you lower the risk for the customer. So it has to be a compelling cost benefit, and it has to be it has to be low risk to the customer. You know, if you sort of falter on any of those, there seems to be a bit more of a challenge in getting those technologies in, especially with our government customers.
Right. And we have somebody asking, so, you know, we have extensive experience with clients in other parts of the world with our proven technology solutions. Is there an alternative path beyond demonstration? In other words, they're saying we've demonstrated it elsewhere. Do we need to demonstrate it again in Australia? So would you be looking at a company's sort of track record of success in other countries, in other words?
Yeah, again, depending on what it is. In one of the earlier slides, you know, Paul had a picture of one of our economy processing facility. Now that's a piece of technology that takes where through our road maintenance contracts we take. You know, we clean, it's all the road sweepings and all the drains and cleaning out all that material. And that material goes and gets dropped into that processing facility, and it splits it out into reusable products. There's about, you know, 15 different products that come off the back of that. So that technology was well used in the UK and Ireland, and it was proven there. And you know, and so through that, it was brought here into Australia through us. So that's an example, I guess, of where that goes. So it doesn't necessarily have to be proven here, but it does. I mean, it depends again, as Derek was saying, it depends on what it is. But if it's got great success, it's proven overseas, then definitely I think it's something that we would look at. And sometimes it may be us bringing that to our customers, you know. So it's like, you know, come and have a look at this, you know. So it's not about, yeah. So that's we definitely look at that.
And another question, does Downer work with any Canadian companies that manufacture? We are looking at connecting with companies in the fluid handling areas as we manufacture specialty products in that area, for example, titanium valves. Not sure who wants to take that, maybe Derek?
I think largely, you know, I stand to be corrected, Flora and Terry, the manufacturing would be the smaller component of our Canadian spend. Largely, I think that's driven by the costs to overcome the distance of transport, the transport costs and the like. So there has to be a certain minimum scale or product like specificity to come up with. But by all means, if there is, I guess, a key factor or key drive, then we'll definitely look at it.
Okay, thanks. And another question, does the social responsibility piece extend to groups outside of Australia and New Zealand?
Yes.
Yes, in a nutshell. Okay, and then we're a cybersecurity company providing information security, risk management, compliance, and audit services. We've been helping our clients in the transportation, government, defense, healthcare, and mining industries. Is there scope with Downer for a Canadian company in these areas?
Sorry, just to repeat that.
So a cybersecurity company providing information security, risk management, compliance, and audit services. If you can hear me over my cat. If anybody can hear my cat, of course. And they've been providing these services to clients in transportation, government, defense, healthcare, and mining.
I know we have a cybersecurity provider right now, but by all means, if you obtain their details, I'll pass it on to our relevant geo vendor who's actually just outside of the door here, and let her weigh it and see how long the contract is being done.
Okay, and so artificial intelligence and predictive maintenance technologies have been game changers for a lot of industries, and Canada has, you know, some clusters and, you know, a bit of a global leader in these areas. So are there key areas for operational improvement that Downer is working on where these kinds of technologies could be used?
Yes, there are. I guess the farthest advanced would be our passenger rail that Ricky and Paul talked about with regards to preventative and reactive maintenance and getting I guess the balance correct to optimize both the operations and costs and delivery. I guess going down farther, on the flip side, probably our plants and equipment. We're just at the, I guess, start of the journey there, building a baseline for both our light commercial vehicles to understand, okay, where do we further optimize that mix? So that, yes, is the overall answer.
Okay, and Paul, in your section, you talked about the ongoing projects and the pipeline of projects. So are there projects that are not fully procured at this point? Or are those projects that you mentioned, sort of the backlog of projects, are they all 100% procured? In other words, are there
I think it'd be a combination.
opportunities?
Probably Derek's probably best to talk to that, but I think
Okay.
For those contracts, say for example, the Sydney Growth trains and high capacity metro, so 25, 30-year contracts, I expect they'd be procured. We've got alliance or contracts with various suppliers to support the through life support contracts in those two assets. But there's certain others, I'm sure, without going into detail, Derek might know that aren't procured. But it's a combination, given the scale and the diversity
Right.
and the tenor of those contracts, it is a combination.
It is a combination, but largely, they'd be fully procured at this stage. But down the track, we look at opportunities.
And once you've sort of won these contracts for long-term service agreements, do you ever subcontract portions of that out?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we do.
Are there examples of those kinds of things that you
I think
subcontract out?
the primary example we keep drawing on the rail side is the Sydney Growth trains, where the head contractor for the delivery of I think off the top of my head 27 sets of 8 cars each initially. I think we've been further 10 or 11 also awarded under that long-term contract. So we're not in the business of train manufacture, so we subcontracted that out to CRRC. So we have a long-term relationship with CRRC, and they're also our JV partner on the HCMT equivalent contract in Melbourne. So absolutely. So that's the design there. I think Hitachi provide air conditioning and the like in the Sydney Growth trains contract. So absolutely is a record of subcontracting where it's not our core area of expertise.
Yeah. So I guess as a general trend, if you go across those business lines we generally outsource the big civil and structural bits, as well as transport design. Would be the ones that we generally don't have in-house capability. With regards to in-house capability, we have that in mechanical, electrical, water maintenance, renewables. However, generally we have our core teams. And you picture in your mind's eye, in peak periods, we would look to outsource, or if there's a specific capability that we have a shortfall within that capability, we would look to outsource as well.
Okay. And as you're sort of moving more and more towards these long-term service agreements, I mean, in the past you were largely doing a lot of construction, a lot of engineering. Are those departments within Downer going to be winding down or reducing in size? Are there no plans for that at this point?
Yeah, the construction group, those departments will wind down. However, we'll move more towards the urban services. Now, that being said, what we're finding is the urban services still has a significant infrastructure and construction piece. However, rather than try and do that in-house, largely we're outsourcing that, again, back to the civil and structural bit. And we're finding a lot of commonality and overlap across the businesses.
Okay. There's a question here. Do you have a controls group that prices services across all sectors?
Controls group.
Not sure I fully understand the question.
I suppose what we generally find is the scope of services in the spec, other than for, I guess, very common items, there's a degree of variability because of the offering that we have. So there would be sub-teams within those lines of businesses that would be charged with, I guess, getting the costing right. I think they're talking about pre-bid. However, across the group, what we try and do is highlight, outliers where someone's, particularly low or particularly high, where we can benchmark across. But no, there's not someone centrally that would control everything.
So one thing that hasn't been talked about at all is, COVID. And, we know that Australia sort of, had fairly strict shutdowns and probably managed COVID a lot better than many, many countries, including Canada. But I'm just wondering what is the impact, what has been the impact on your business of COVID, and what are you seeing across Australia in terms of, sectors that have been hard hit, what sectors are coming back? What have the effects been?
Well, I suppose if you talk within Downer, and jump in, Paul and Ricky, if you want to add additional flavor, but the hospitality business basically ground to a halt. It just stopped. I mean, even before we had the lockdowns, I remember speaking to the people that we provide services at the zoo here, the Toronto Zoo. They were saying, instead of thousands of people a day, they were looking at tens, like 10, 12 people a day. Similarly, the stadium shut down. Beyond